Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Let me ask you something gentle today. Do you remember who first taught you how to hold a spoon? Maybe it was your mother, sitting across a kitchen table with tired eyes but the softest smile. Maybe it was your grandfather, with shaky hands but endless patience. Or maybe you just don't remember because for most of us it was something so small, so natural, that it faded into the background of childhood. But for some children, especially those with special needs, learning to hold a spoon isn't small at all. It's a battle, a moment, a triumph. If you believe that the kindest things in life often begin with the smallest gestures, if you believe that healing can start from a plastic spoon and a little patience, then go ahead, like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Every week, we share real stories that remind you what it means to be human again. The diner was tucked quietly on the edge of Flagstaff, Arizona, just close enough to the whispering pines of the national park, but far enough to avoid the buzz of tourists. It was the kind of place with cracked leather booths, a jukebox that hadn't played in years, and a warmth that wrapped around you like an old quilt. Mr. Samuel Brooks sat at the corner table by the window, his posture straight as ever, even at 66. Everything about him was measured, from the crease in his shirt to the way he placed his napkin on his lap. Across from him sat his 8-year-old son Jamie, whose small hands trembled near the untouched bowl of chicken noodle soup. Jamie's eyes were fixed on it. Not with hunger. With fear. The boy's cerebral palsy was mild but cruel, enough to make daily tasks a quiet battlefield. Especially in public. Samuel watched his son from behind silver-framed glasses, lips tight, mind racing. He had brought in therapists, private aides, specialized tools. But nothing had changed the way Jamie flinched when eyes were on him. And now, here they were again. Another lunch. Another bowl. Another stare. Claire Jennings noticed the tension the moment she approached the table with a pitcher of water. She'd seen it before, not just in children, but in grieving fathers too. Her name tag said Claire, but it didn't tell you the full story, that she used to be a pediatric therapy assistant, or that she hadn't worked with kids since her daughter passed away 2 years ago. Still, some instincts never leave you. She bent slightly, placing the water on the table. Jamie didn't look up. His small fingers curled around the spoon, lifting it slowly, and just as quickly, the soup tipped out, spilling onto the tablecloth. His face flushed red. His lips pressed together. His body shrank into the booth like he wanted to disappear. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't offer a napkin. Or sympathy. Instead, she knelt beside the table and pulled a second spoon from her apron, a white plastic one. She held it between her fingers with a smile, her voice soft enough that only Jamie could hear. "You know," she said gently, "there's a little trick to stop it from slipping. Want to try?" Jamie glanced at her, unsure. Claire set her hand on the table and showed him, tilting the spoon slightly, balancing it with her pinky. "See? Just like this. You don't have to grip it tight. Let the spoon do the work." Jamie watched closely. Then, hesitantly, he picked up the plastic spoon. Claire didn't rush him. Didn't correct him. She just waited, her eyes calm and warm. The boy dipped the spoon into the soup again, shaky, but steadier. He brought it up. No spill. His lips parted. And for the first time in a long time, Jamie took a full bite of soup all by himself. His smile was small, but it lit his whole face. Samuel sat frozen, his hands still on his lap. In all his years of trying, all his resources poured into solutions, nothing had ever worked this simply. No coaching session. No expensive equipment. Just a moment. Just a woman with a plastic spoon. And a little kindness. Claire stood slowly and gave Jamie a wink. "You did that. Not me." Then she walked away without fanfare, leaving father and son in a silence that, for once, felt full, not empty. The next morning, the diner felt quieter than usual. The regular hum of breakfast chatter, the clink of coffee cups, even the hiss of the kitchen grill, It all seemed to take a step back, as if holding its breath. Claire Jennings was wiping down a booth when a tall man in a driver's uniform stepped through the door, his presence precise and polished. He looked around until his eyes landed on her. "Miss Jennings?" he asked, his voice low and formal. She blinked. "Yes." He stepped forward and handed her a small cream-colored envelope, handwritten, sealed with care. "It's from Mr. Brooks," the man said. "He asked me to deliver it personally." Before she could ask anything more, the man turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with the envelope pressed between her fingers like it might vanish if she breathed too hard. Claire opened it slowly. The handwriting was firm, slightly slanted, deliberate. She read each word aloud in her mind, her lips parting by the end. "Yesterday was the first time my son ate in public without trying to hide his face. I don't know how to thank you for that. But if you're willing, I'd like to offer something small in return. Please consider coming to our home on weekends to help Jamie with his eating. No obligation, just one father's hope." Claire sat down in the empty booth, the letter resting in her lap like a weight. She hadn't worked with children since losing her daughter, Lily. After months of hospital visits and chemotherapy smiles, she couldn't stand the sight of small hands or whispered laughter. The pain was too sharp, too fresh. She had folded her past into a locked drawer and thrown away the key. But something about the letter, about that boy's smile yesterday, stirred a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She folded the letter and tucked it into her apron. Later that afternoon, something, instinct, curiosity, maybe a whisper from somewhere deeper, pulled her back toward the booth by the window. The one from yesterday. And there he was. Jamie. Sitting alone, legs swinging slightly beneath the seat, a paper napkin folded neatly in front of him. In his hands, he held the same white plastic spoon she'd left behind the day before. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't scared. He was waiting. Claire approached slowly. Jamie looked up at her, his eyes hopeful and steady, as if he had never doubted for a second that she'd return. He held out the spoon like it was a treasure. "I saved it," he whispered. "In case you forgot." She stared at him, this boy with trembling hands and a fragile heart, and something in her cracked open. Not the kind of crack that breaks. The kind that lets the light in. She didn't need to think any further. Claire knelt to meet his eye and gave a small nod. "All right," she said, voice soft. "But only if we keep playing the no-spill game." Jamie beamed. She didn't say yes because of the job. Not because of the money. And not even because of the letter. She said yes because, for the first time in a long while, someone had looked at her not with pity, but with trust. With need. And in that moment, Claire realized something she hadn't felt in years. She was needed again. Every Saturday morning, the sound of gravel crunching beneath Claire's shoes echoed down the long driveway of the Brooks estate. The mansion itself stood like a silent monument of success, stone columns, tall glass windows, and a manicured lawn that looked more like a museum exhibit than a front yard. Yet despite all its grandeur, it was the small, unassuming bag in Claire's hand that would make the biggest difference inside that house. Inside were the usual things, a few plastic spoons in every color of the rainbow, a rolled-up checkered tablecloth she'd found at a thrift store, and 2 thermoses filled with homemade soup. Nothing fancy. Just chicken and rice. But it wasn't about the soup. It never really was. At precisely 11, Jamie would be waiting at the breakfast nook by the sunlit window, his legs dangling, hands pressed eagerly on the table, eyes already searching the bag she carried. Claire would smile, unfold the little tablecloth with a practiced flourish, and lay out the spoons like they were fine silver. Then came the game. "All right, soup stars," she'd say, lifting the lid from the thermos as the scent of rosemary and broth filled the air. "Today's challenge, 1 full spoon, no spills, earns you a gold star." Jamie giggled every time. Sometimes he'd request the green spoon. Sometimes the red. But always, he gave his full focus, leaning in, hand steady, eyes narrowed like a little scientist solving the universe. At first, he struggled. A few drops. A few frowns. But week after week, something changed. He stopped hiding his left hand beneath the table. He stopped looking up nervously every time soup fell. And one day, halfway through a round of soup stars, Jamie dipped the spoon, lifted it to his mouth, swallowed, and wiped his lips with the back of his sleeve, just like any 8-year-old boy who'd forgotten to be afraid. Claire marked a big gold star in his notebook. "I didn't spill," he whispered. "No, sweetheart," she smiled. "You didn't." In the doorway, Samuel Brooks watched in silence. He'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on feeding therapists, behavioral experts, occupational specialists, none of whom had unlocked this kind of joy in his son. None of them had brought spoons in bright colors. None of them had rolled out a checkered cloth like it was a picnic. None of them had made Jamie laugh. And yet here she was, this woman with a past too heavy for most to carry, sitting beside his boy with a plastic spoon and a smile like springtime, undoing years of tension with nothing but warmth and patience. Samuel didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, hands folded, watching his son eat without fear, without shame. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to fix anything. Because at that table, for those 30 quiet minutes, Jamie wasn't a problem to solve. He was just a little boy with a soup spoon and a star on his page. And Claire? She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't even a therapist. She was the one who made meals about more than food. She was the one who taught his son to eat like he mattered. It started with little things. Jamie began talking about Claire more often, not just on weekends, but every day. At breakfast, over schoolwork, before bedtime. Her name floated through the halls of the Brooks estate like a song that wouldn't stop playing. He spoke of the games she made up, the way she let him stir the soup himself, how she told stories about clouds that looked like dragons. Samuel listened, at first, with quiet gratitude. But then came the drawings. Claire's face appeared again and again in Jamie's sketchbook, always smiling, always holding a spoon or reaching down to help him. One page had her sitting beside him under a tree, another showed her high-fiving him after a no-spill victory. She was, in Jamie's eyes, more than a helper. She was becoming a fixture in his world. A symbol of comfort. Then one afternoon, as Samuel adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, Jamie stood beside him with a curious look. "Dad?" he asked. "Yes, son." Jamie fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "Can Claire teach me how to tie a tie?" Samuel froze. The knot he had just perfected suddenly felt too tight. His fingers paused. His breath caught. That was supposed to be his moment. A father's rite of passage, passing down the little things, the symbolic things. He imagined himself guiding Jamie's hands, showing him step by step like his own father once had. But his son hadn't asked him. He had asked for Claire. The words shouldn't have stung so much. And yet they did. Deeper than he expected. Samuel had never been good with emotions, never been the soft one in the family. That had been his wife's role. Since her passing, he had tried, through tutors, caretakers, and careful planning, to fill the void with structure and order. But not softness. Claire had offered that without trying. Without asking. And now, Samuel felt himself receding into the background of his own son's life. He began to pull back. Subtly at first, cutting the sessions from weekends to bi-weekly, asking the housekeeper to be present during lessons, requesting updates instead of observations. Claire noticed, of course. She always noticed. But she didn't push. She simply nodded when her hours were adjusted, said thank you and offered tea, and kept showing up on time. Still, something had shifted. Jamie noticed it too. He stopped bringing his sketchbook to the table. He smiled less. Sometimes he asked if Claire would be staying longer, and when told no, he simply nodded and turned back to his soup. Samuel watched all of it unfold, the knot in his chest growing heavier by the day. He told himself it was about boundaries. about doing what was best for his child. But deep down, in the part of his heart he rarely visited, Samuel Brooks was wrestling with a truth he didn't want to admit. He was afraid of being replaced. Not as a provider. Not as a protector. But as a parent. And in that fear, he did what many strong men do when they feel small, he pulled away. Not out of anger. But out of heartbreak. The video was barely 30 seconds long. Shot from across the room, grainy, slightly tilted, it showed Claire sitting beside Jamie at the table in the Brooks estate, guiding his hand as he balanced a plastic spoon full of soup. The sound was faint, but the tenderness in the scene didn't need words. Claire leaned in, smiling. Jamie giggled softly. It was, by all accounts, a beautiful moment. Except for the caption. Billionaire lets waitress play mommy to his disabled son. It was uploaded anonymously, on a parenting forum that loved drama more than truth. Within hours, the post made its way to other corners of the internet, gathering comments, assumptions, half-baked judgments. And then, inevitably, it landed in Samuel Brooks' inbox. He watched the video in silence. The image of Claire so close to Jamie, the ease between them, the way his son leaned into her without hesitation, it struck something raw. Something Samuel hadn't yet worked through. The fear of replacement. The ache of not being enough. And now this. He didn't ask where the video came from. He didn't ask Claire if she knew. He didn't ask Jamie what really happened. He just reacted. The next morning, Claire received a short email from Samuel's office. Thank you for your time and service to the Brooks family. We will no longer be needing weekend sessions. Compensation will be sent in full. No further contact is necessary. No signature. No explanation. Just silence. Claire stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. Just hollow. She knew how delicate these moments were, how quickly healing could be mistaken for overstepping. But still it hurt. Not because of the job, or even the boy she had come to care so deeply for, but because Samuel hadn't asked. Hadn't given her the dignity of a question. Only the finality of a decision. So she packed her things. Her apron. Her thermos. The faded checkered cloth. And the box of colorful plastic spoons, Jamie's favorites. She didn't leave a note at first. Just stood at the edge of the breakfast nook one last time, letting her eyes linger on the chair where Jamie used to swing his legs and whisper stories. Then, on a whim, she scribbled something on a torn piece of paper and placed it inside the spoon box. It read, "I didn't teach him to eat. I was just there the moment he believed he deserved to." No name. No plea. Just the truth. Then she walked out the door quietly without ceremony, her hands suddenly feeling colder than they had in years. The silence in the Brooks household returned, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. Jamie no longer sang to himself while setting the table. He didn't hum during meals, didn't ask for the red or blue spoon. He didn't even complain. He just sat, eyes fixed on his bowl of soup as if it belonged to someone else. When dinner came, he pushed the bowl away. Even the chicken and rice, his favorite. Samuel noticed. Of course, he noticed. The boy who used to count spoonfuls with pride now refused even one. Samuel, ever the man of action, called in a nutritionist from Phoenix, highly recommended, a specialist in pediatric feeding behavior. She came with charts and cheerful tones, with flashcards and reward systems. Jamie barely looked at her. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He simply shut down. The third session ended in silence. The expert left with a concerned expression and a well-padded check. Samuel stood by the front door, watching the car drive away, his hands clenched too tightly for a man who spent his life in control. It was the housekeeper, Rosa, who saw it happen. She had just brought out the soup, still warm, still homemade by the chef who had once consulted with Claire on the recipe Jamie liked best. The boy was sitting in the breakfast nook again, back straight, lips pressed together. He picked up a spoon, a real one, polished silver. Carefully, deliberately, he dipped it into the bowl. His hand trembled. The spoon tipped. Soup spilled across the placemat. Jamie froze. Then he dropped the spoon with a sharp clatter and ran from the table. By the time Samuel got there, Rosa was still standing in the kitchen, holding her breath. "He tried," she whispered. "He really tried." Samuel didn't say a word. He just turned and walked toward Jamie's room. The door was half open. The boy was curled up on the bed, facing the wall, shoulders shaking, not in sobs, but in that quiet, invisible grief only children seem to carry. Samuel stepped inside. He noticed the sketchbook first, open on the desk, its pages slightly curled from so many mornings of sunlight. There, drawn with deliberate strokes and soft shading, was Claire. She sat cross-legged on the floor in the drawing, holding a white spoon in her hand, smiling, her expression calm, steady, and unmistakably kind. Next to her, in Jamie's blocky handwriting, were 5 simple words. She didn't need a silver spoon. Samuel's throat tightened. He stood there, unmoving, staring at the drawing like it was a mirror. It wasn't just about the soup, or the spoon, or even Claire. It was about presence, patience. Jamie hadn't needed the best-trained specialist or the finest equipment. He hadn't needed luxury or perfection. He had needed someone who stayed, even when he spilled. Especially when he spilled. Samuel looked down at his son's small, balled-up fists, trembling under the blanket. And for the first time, he didn't feel angry or confused. He just felt ashamed. The clinic wasn't much to look at. Tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a faded grocery store, the free community health center in South Flagstaff barely had a working sign. The paint peeled at the edges of the windows. The waiting room chairs creaked. But there was something about the place, something honest. No polished marble, no valet parking. Just people trying their best with what little they had. Samuel Brooks had never stepped inside a place like this. Not because he thought himself above it, but because in his world, answers came from appointments made weeks in advance, from specialists in high-rise offices, from handwritten reports sealed in leather folders. But not today. Today, he walked in without calling ahead. No security detail. No personal assistant. Just a small object in his hand, barely bigger than his palm, featherlight and scratched with time. A white plastic spoon. Claire was sitting at a folding desk in the corner, her hair loosely tied back, a clipboard resting on her lap. She wore no makeup. Her name tag was crooked. And yet, when she looked up and saw him, her expression didn't falter. No surprise. No smile. Just quiet recognition. Samuel approached slowly and placed the spoon on her desk without saying a word at first. Its edges were worn. Faint teeth marks still visible near the handle. Claire looked down at it, then up at him. "I kept it," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Jamie used it the first time he believed he could do something, without failing. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Samuel drew a breath, then exhaled. "I spent years trying to control everything," he continued. "Trying to protect him by making things perfect. Specialists. Tutors. Therapies. I thought, if I just fixed everything around him, he wouldn't have to feel broken inside." His gaze lowered to the spoon. But this little thing, this scratched-up plastic spoon, did more than all of that combined. Claire said nothing. Just waited. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a piece of paper. On it, Jamie had drawn again, a simple picture of 3 stick figures. A tall one. A small one. And between them, a woman with a spoon in her hand, smiling. Below it, in Jamie's handwriting, "Let's eat together again." Samuel's eyes were glassy now. "He misses you. And I realize. I miss who I was when you were around him." Then quietly, as if admitting a sin, "If that spoon taught my son how to eat, I believe you might be the one who can teach me how to be his father. Claire looked at the drawing, then at the spoon, and finally, at the man in front of her. Not the billionaire. Not the client. Just a father, humbled. She reached out and placed her hand over the spoon. I don't need to teach you how to be a father, she said gently. You already are one. You just forgot that it's okay to be learning. He smiled then. Not wide. Not triumphant. But real. This time, when Claire returned to the Brooks house, she didn't bring just spoons or soup. She brought presents. Partnership. And she didn't come for Jamie alone. She came for both of them. The ribbon was red. Bright. Unapologetically bold. It stretched across the entrance to a modest building on the east side of Flagstaff. Nothing extravagant, just brick walls and big windows that welcomed sunlight. But inside, something remarkable was beginning. A quiet revolution, led by a spoon. The sign above the door read, "Spoons for Stars." What started with a plastic spoon and a soft-spoken waitress had become a community initiative, one that brought together parents, therapists, and children with special needs under a single philosophy. Confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from permission, to try, to spill, to begin again. Claire stood just inside the doorway, adjusting the little banner Jamie had colored himself. Samuel, in his pressed gray blazer, checked the last few items on the clipboard, chairs arranged, soup station set up, donation boxes labeled. But none of the usual pre-event tension filled the air. Because this wasn't a press release. It wasn't about publicity. It was about dignity. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Jamie stepped out from behind the curtain. His suit was navy, slightly oversized in the sleeves, with a clip-on tie that had taken 3 tries to get right. His hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished. But what caught everyone's attention was what he carried. A single white plastic spoon. The room quieted. Phones were lowered. Breaths were held. Jamie walked to the center of the room where a small table stood, set with a bowl of warm soup and a napkin folded just so. He climbed up on the step stool someone had placed there and sat down, feet barely touching the floor. He picked up the spoon with both hands. The room was so still, you could hear the rustle of his jacket as he moved. Jamie dipped the spoon into the soup, lifted it slowly, his hand steady, his brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Then he brought it to his mouth. No spill. The applause didn't come right away. Because first, Jamie set the spoon down, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked up at the crowd. "Humne," he said, voice small but clear, "Kong Kong Lam Du." A pause. Then he smiled. "And hung nu kolo du, Kong 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 so nua." Claire's hand flew to her mouth, eyes shimmering. Beside her, Samuel placed a gentle hand on her back, then stepped forward and rested his palm on Jamie's shoulder. The room erupted in applause. Not polite. Not practiced. But real. The kind that comes when people see something fragile become something brave. In the crowd were parents who had nearly given up hope. Children who had never held a spoon in public. Therapists who had tried everything but never found the right method. And now, here was a boy who once couldn't eat without trembling, standing tall in a little blue suit, spoon in hand, saying without words, "You're allowed to make a mess. You're allowed to try again." From that day forward, Spoons for Stars became more than a name. It became a movement. And the little white spoon? It was framed on the wall of the lobby, scratched, imperfect, and quietly heroic. If you believe that even a single spoon can change an entire journey, go ahead and leave a like on this video. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more healing, human stories every single week. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you next time.